Welcome. Hello, everyone, my fellow insomniacs, cultural disruptors, and change makers. Welcome to uBuntuSpeaks, conversations spoken in the dark. With me, Hermance Mitsotsa. Your global health, workforce development, cultural intelligence, and DEI trainer, strategist, and coach. Wow, can you believe it is the start of a brand new year? 2022 is finally here. Oh my goodness, I thought 2020 and 2021 was never going to end. So I'm one of those people that's just excited to start a brand new year. Today's podcast, Do Your Employees Feel Psychologically Safe? Kicks off our leadership and workforce development series. We will be having in-depth conversations with our special guests about our mental health, emotional, and spiritual needs around the jobs we do every day. Yes, the conversations we have with ourselves and sometimes others that keep us up at night, hence why I'm an insomniac and I believe so many of you are too. Now, for today's conversation, I have invited my friend and colleague, Deb Enloe. Amongst the million things that we have found ourselves doing these past 2 COVID years, we are also certified psychological safety in the workplace trainers and coaches. And because I know the importance of introducing oneself to the world, Deb, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you, Hermance. Happy to be here. And now I'm wondering if I've got puffiness under my eyes from insomnia.
Right. Oh my goodness.
Keeping us up at night.
Yes.
Happy to be here. I'm calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Hey, it's cold, right? Is it cold up there?
It is. It is. December, January, cold.
Too cold for me. In Atlanta here, it's cold, but you know what? Not as cold. Okay, yes.
I'm joining you as a certified psychologically safe coach, a professional intelligence coach, a certified diversity coach. I'm also a recovering executive. Over the course of my career, I have worked in pretty much all layers of an organization, from frontline to executive. And I have certainly found myself in some psychologically unsafe environments. And then I also, as a previous executive, worry, did I not create safe spaces? So as I've done a lot of self journaling in the last couple of years, and then also additional knowledge retention, really reflecting on, what that journey's been. So thank you for having me here today. Happy to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is mine, because this is a topic that, we both know, I am truly passionate about, and I think needs to be discussed, and it's not discussed enough. So why not take the lead in doing so with this brand new year? So thank you very much, Deb, for joining me here today. Now let's dive into this, this topic at hand, psychological safety. Now, this is a term that, is now, picking up steam and being thrown around, but it's not really very new. It's not a concept that's very new, but with these recent times, more people are talking about it. So could you please tell our listeners, what is psychological safety?
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's so many definitions out there. Like one from Leader Factors, it's really about rewarded vulnerability. So what does that look like? How do you reward individuals being vulnerable? There's also Oxford Dictionary would describe that as really preventing injury or mental harm. So there's a couple lenses of which to look at that, but fundamentally, really, how are you creating these safe spaces for your employees to show up as their authentic selves?
Okay. And why is this concept so important? Because, I remember growing up, and it was just this idea that you just went to work to make money, right? You go to work to make money, to make your ends meet, and then you come home and you just suck it up. And I remember my parents going to work and coming home, and I knew they had had a bad day at work, because oftentimes that meant that evening was going to be tense, right? And so I could always tell the mood of my parents, and then myself also. There was a point where every time I came back from my government job, my husband would be like, Oh, not a good day. Okay, just breathe. Just breathe, you know? And so why is it needed? Why is this idea of psychological safety needed in today's work environment?
Yeah, I think there's, fundamentally a couple things. We're human. And it's really leaning into that fact and thinking about as humans, if you're an organization, how do you best leverage and honor the humans that work in your environment? So if you think about really creating spaces with, we know mental health is on the rise. I think before the pandemic, statistics were around 19% in the US.
Wow.
Some form of mental illness. And if you're in a psychologically unsafe environment, that can trigger that even higher. So
Oh my
just
goodness.
fundamentally on a human level, it's really leaning into that. Harvard Business Review did a report, and that also shows that around 60% of employees avoid their offender if
60%?
they're
Oh my
feeling in
goodness.
this space that somebody is toxic or they create harm, they will spend that time avoiding. 80% around worrying about problems that they don't feel comfortable raising. So think about that as a leader in your organization. If there's all these problems your employees know, and you have not given them the permission or created that modeling that this is a safe space to share, to learn, make mistakes, let's learn together. I mean, there's so many facets of it. I'd love to hear what you observed as well.
Well, first of all, those statistics blow my mind. And when I was actually in the workplace myself, I would have said 100%. But now that I'm out, because there's still, of course, people that are still choosing to stay in the workplace, and those who have left are leaving for various different reasons. But 80%, I mean, as an executive, as a leader, as a CEO, if I knew those kind of statistics existed in my corporation, in my organization, I would immediately want to act, immediately do something. Because for me, this idea of psychological safety is around this need for every single employee, every single person who's choosing to wake up in the morning and go to work, to feel as though once they get to their particular job, they feel included, right? That, someone sees them, understands them, and really includes them in the decision making, in the work, right? And then it's also, I would want it to be a safe place to learn. Because you're there from it's not really a 9-to-5 job anymore. No, but I don't even think people have 9-to-5 jobs anymore, right? It's really much longer than that. And so you're spending all this time of your life in a space, you're there to also learn. So safe to learn. And I would think that you would also want to be in a place where you feel safe to contribute, like your expertise, that's why they hired you, right? And so being able to feel safe to contribute all of that, and then in certain circumstances, be able to challenge the status quo, challenge the decisions that are being made, challenge what is being said, right? And what is not being said, without this fear of, if I say something, if I do something, that I'm going to be harassed, I'm going to, be marginalized, punished, I'll face retribution. Those are all the things I think actually the lack of being able to do that safely is what contributes to that 80%. I mean, that's just astounding that the statistics are so high.
Yeah, and even just bringing it back of innovation. How are you innovating as an organization and preparing for the future if you're not creating spaces just fundamentally to allow employees to challenge status quo? Let's look at another way of doing this and having a space to do that.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I feel like organizations who you don't see growing and are often like stagnant are those have possibly not created those environments where people can feel free to, to contribute to the innovation that's needed, right? for the growth of that organization and that corporation. And so you're right, it has to be part of the fabric of like this idea of like innovation. And so thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. We're here speaking about this topic, but I know personally, I have some personal experiences of being in a psychologically unsafe environment. But I'd love for you to, maybe share some of the experiences that you've had.
How much time do we have?
I tell you, oh my goodness. Okay. If you could share one. If you can share one. Because this is only a 1 hour podcast. And so yes, just one with you.
I appreciate the gift that I can laugh about it now.
Right.
Really, at the time, was not laughing. Yeah, I mean, there's several scenarios, and one I think, just fundamentally stands out for me the most was I was working in an organization and there was a lot of change happening, which, change can be good. It's how you manage that change. I'm also a change architect, so I fully understand that now. In that, there were a lot of things that were happening that were going to impact myself post kind of this big change that was happening. And there wasn't a platform or an environment where we could openly have dialogue about that. And being who I am, I internalized a lot of that and found myself incredibly stressed. I also ended up coming down with a cold, which then turned into, I ended up with Bell's palsy.
Wow.
And there were triggers throughout the day. I could justify all of them. It's like, something is happening. Something's not right with my face. And it was on my way home, I could tell I couldn't close my eye. And literally, I could not close my eye. And I think back on the fact, I was around people all day. No one even said anything. I've leaned in and said, is there something wrong with your eye? My mouth was also distorted. And it took me about 12 weeks to kind of go through therapy, and fortunate, most of that kind of came back. But when I reflect on that, so much of that comes back to, well, I wasn't told I couldn't ask questions. The flip didn't happen either. We weren't modeled as a leadership team that you can, let's question what's happening here. Let's have some dialogue around it. Let's look at this. So there's pieces of that, that I look back, and even myself, as I've reflected on, as I've been a leader, have I always modeled that? Have I created spaces for people? Because we all enter from different lenses. We all got to where we are on a totally different path. Your influences growing up, and, all of that. And to assume, because I'm not saying you can't ask questions, that that you can. So what does that look like? How free are you to really contribute in creating those safe spaces? So for me, it really, and in that job, like even going back, like I got to a point where I found myself literally like silently screaming in my car on the way home.
Oh my goodness.
Hey, this is not a good spot to be in. And I was fortunate, it took me about 8 months and I was able to find another job, but not everybody has that luxury either, or that ability to just go find a different job. So how do we help really create these spaces, or even understand what's happening for our employees? What is it like to work in this organization? But yeah, I'd love to hear some of your.
I mean, like you, I've been that leader, that executive, leader, director, and then I've also been the employee, right? I've also been the person who was being supervised. And I know for me, because I had the experience of being supervised in a way that was so stifling, that micromanagement style, I dreaded meetings. Right. I remember when my supervisor would pass, like I knew her footsteps, right? The way she walked. And so those of us who should supervise, we remember like when she would come in, and the closer she got to the cubicles, the more tense we would get, because we simply knew that if she stopped by your cubicle, it was not going to be positive, just because of the demeanor and this that she had. And so it got to the point where I would go to my car and cry during lunch instead of like, going out but it got to the point before I decided like this is no longer where I need to be. But I would literally physically cry and go through this. Why am I here? Why am I letting her, affect me this way? I started doubting myself and my contribution to the organization, all because I was in a space where I wasn't safe, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, it's amazing how what made it worse was not that, okay, I'm letting this one person, affect me, but it's because although she was supported by a system that made it okay for her to treat those she was supervising in that way. So whenever I had the courage to make a complaint, it turned on me. It made the situation even worse because the system around was supporting her behavior. And so those are the kind of things where I know I wasn't the only one. Like with other colleagues, we would joke about the fact that we would go to our cars and cry. It's just like, why am I letting this woman make me cry? And then I would justify it by saying, I'm not crying because she ain't worth a tear. I'm crying because I need to find a way out, and I feel stuck. So that was my experience. And then also on the flip side, being, an executive director, I remember, because I am that workaholic to a certain degree, I remember not taking into consideration my staff's working styles and also personal responsibilities outside of the home, right? And so I demanded more of them than I should have. And because at a certain point in time, they wanted to please, and their job, their livelihood depending on this work, they didn't feel free coming to me and saying, look, I can't work past 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, 5 o'clock at night. I got my children, And so what I did is I started noticing that, and I was like, you know what? I need to build relationships with my staff, right? I need to create a place where they feel comfortable coming and talk to me about issues, and also give me that 360 feedback, review, because a lot of times we give the feedback, but then, we don't create an environment that's open for them to give us feedback in return. It's a one-way kind of thing. And I had to come to terms with the fact that as a leader, regardless of how many projects we had, how many grants, how much funding, how well we were supposedly doing, if internally I was creating a toxic environment or helping to contribute to a toxic environment, then I wasn't doing my job, right, as a leader. And that eventually I would not make the impact that I wanted to make. So that's just those are the examples that I have. And that leads us to this other question about impact. How does, you talked about the fact that being in a psychologically unsafe environment led you to, basically have an illness, that is, from what I know, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but that's something that stays with you that you have to find ways to control, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So how did it affect you emotionally also? And that mental health piece?
Yeah, it really was a wake-up call for me in the fact of how much I was allowing the stress of my work environment to really impact my personal life. And that's really where I had to sit back and be, how important is this job to me? Like at the end of the day, Like, this is just not worth giving my life for, or my health. Like, right now it's policy, what would be next if I just continue in this environment?
Right.
So me, it was a very physical, I mean, you could see it visibly. And that also led to a whole lot of interesting experiences of how people interacted with me, because suddenly I'm like, I'm the same person inside, yet you don't know how to have dialogue with me because my face, was very visibly different. So for me, yeah, it was really spending some time thinking about how do I get out of this and making a plan for that, and I look at today with, with COVID happening, and we've got a lot of, in the last year and a half, 2 years, there's been that quick shift to working remotely. Not everybody even has a safe space or a quiet place at home to work. We're adding all these stressors of either you have to buy another house so you can accommodate, having an office to work from home. You've got the stressors of life. We're all human. There's so much concern about what are the next steps just in everything, both with my job. Do I need to go back into the office? Can I stay remote? Can I have a hybrid? Do I get some choice? You're going to tell me, what does that look like? I mean, all of that just can trigger anxiety as well. And, what does that overall look like?
Wow. Yeah, everything you said there is very true. And then I think about those individuals who are already having a tough time, right, prior to COVID. And then COVID comes on top of that, because there's a lot of our colleagues, people who are at work, who you never knew were taking care of their parents, right?
Yep.
Had people within their homes that they were taking care of after that 7 to 6 job, right? And now COVID has shown us that these people are also caretakers. So on top of that, and just the relationships and that we have apart from our job. And so I really think that just if you are an employer, if you're an executive, a CEO, a team lead, understanding that people's lives do not just surround their job, right? They are not their job. Like they're human, like you said from the beginning, they're human. So having said that, I'd love, to give our listeners a moment to process everything we've just shared with them, and a little break. And so to our listeners, all of you who are out there, I'd like for you to, take this time during this break to really think about some of the behaviors and the outcomes of working in a psychological, unsafe, and toxic environment. We've shared our experiences with you, but we definitely would love for you to take this time to think about your own experiences. And then if you are, like I said, an executive, a team lead, how you've gone about and dig deep to contributing to that a psychologically unsafe environment for the people that you are charged with, mentoring, supervising and working with. So thank you. And we'll be back in a few moments. Welcome back to uBuntuSpeaks, Conversations Spoken in the Dark, with myself, Herman Smitsota, and our lovely guest, my good friend and colleague, Deb Enloe. And this podcast today is about, do your employees feel psychologically safe? we've had I mean, the start of this episode has really, we've shared, our experiences, right? And why we think it's really important to talk about this idea of creating a psychologically safe environment and to be in one, right? And I want us to, in the second half of this episode, I want us to really give strategies to, how that can be done, right? But before I do that, I'd love for us to talk about the behaviors.
Yeah, how
What
have
do you
you
think?
yeah, that sounds good. How have you found, what behaviors and outcomes have you observed like in toxic environments?
What I've observed are people being present, but not being emotionally, intellectually present.
Mhm.
So they've basically checked out. So one of the behaviors is like being in a meeting, being asked to be in a meeting, and the only people speaking is the person who called for the meeting and the person who has the authority to make the decision, and everybody else is quiet. When someone asks, "What do you think?" "Oh, I agree." I mean, oh, I have nothing to say. But you can tell that everybody's sitting there saying a whole lot in their head, but they don't feel safe enough to contribute, to say what they really feel. Or, behaviors could be just simply more like I shared with you, just this idea of making your car the safe space to be able to scream and cry and cuss.
Yeah.
Right, right. I mean, I remember just like you, I remember times driving and just like screaming and blasting my radio and just on the way home. And here in Atlanta, it's like, an hour and a half drive home, even though your job is like 20 minutes away. But those are some of the behaviors I've seen. Also, aggression.
Mm-hmm.
And, and people who would have normally not had this characteristics of being aggressive are now finding themselves having to justify in a real forceful way. Like, I'm here, see me, I am someone too, right? But not having, and that can come in conflict. Another behavior that I've noticed is self-sabotage.
Mm.
So people choosing to say, okay, I can't, I don't have the courage to say I quit, but I'm going to, without realizing it, do things and self-sabotage myself so that maybe they'll just fire me. And then I have no choice but to leave. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that. And so those are the things I feel, those are some of the behaviors. And I'm sure our listeners during our break were able to come up with some ways also. And then the outcomes is just for those who decide to stay 10, 15, 20 years with an employer who doesn't care for them, see them, or give them space to learn safely and contribute, it's mental health.
Mm-hmm.
It's mental health illness. It's fear, the sense of just walking around on eggshells all the time, and fear, and worse, the sense of not being good enough.
Yeah.
And that is a painful, painful feeling to have on a daily basis. The sense of you are not worthy. I constantly have to prove myself, and I will never, ever be enough. That's painful. That's painful. And it trickles down to families, it trickles down to communities. And so at the end of the day, it teaches our society that we have to put up with things that make us ill just to get by, just to be able to live. And so those are some of the outcomes that I have seen. Yeah.
coming up for me as you were sharing is just even thinking about the fact is often organizations forget it should be a dual relationship. One,
Yes.
you're here to serve and help us meet our, revenue goals, outcome goals. It
Right.
has to be kind of a bi-directional win. Individuals have choices of where they work in a lot of situations. And why wouldn't you want people being able to show up and not feel like I can't get out of bed? How many sick days do I have left that I can take? Like I need to just, it's all that keep hitting snooze. I
Mm,
bring myself, but I'll get up, I'll show up. And yet, how do you really kind of reinvigorate
right.
force and
Right.
have a place that, yes, they're getting a paycheck and they're contributing in a way that
Mhm.
allows to add value.
Exactly. And I know you and I talk a lot about, being DEI and belonging specialists and trainers. We have had past conversations about this idea of being able to show up as your authentic self,
Mm-hmm.
right? In a place where you are respected. And more than just respected, you are valued. And and I think of this sense of belonging, right? There are people who, really see their job as a 9 to 5. I'm just go there to make money, right? Or, to be able to sustain myself. But a vast majority want to be able to do so without having to put on a mask, right? Without having to stand in front of the mirror and figure, is my boss going to critique what I'm wearing now? Does this fit? Does, like, how do I look? Am I looking presentable? Am I going to get microaggressions thrown at me left and right? Like, that is exhausting, And so when I think of just how psychological safety in the workplace and the work that we do, the coaching, the executive coaching that we do with companies, right, and leaders to get them to help create that space, coupled with the DEI work that we do, the cultural assessments that we do for organizations, and to get them to understand the place that they are in right now, and if they are really inclusive enough. And yes, they may be diverse, but are they inclusive, right? Or is there equity, is it felt by everyone? All of that coupled together, I feel like in order to be able to meet any DEI goals you may have, you need to create a psychologically safe environment, right? Because how many times, Deb, have we done these culture facilitation sessions, and we ask a question and it's silent.
Yeah.
Like no one wants to answer. They don't trust us. Like, are you going to go back to my supervisor? Is this being recorded? Or, they're speaking, but they don't want you to see their face. Like, people fear, like we have been trained as, certified culture facilitators to find ways to ask a question so someone actually feels comfortable enough to answer.
Mm-hmm.
That speaks to the psychologically unsafe environment that they're used to, right? So it's just amazing how all of this fits together. But I strongly feel that it's creating those environments that are really important. So I'd love at this time for you to speak about how can organizations, corporations, and just and even learning environments, universities and stuff like that, can create psychologically safe environments for their staff and for the people that they serve.
Yeah, when we work with organizations, we really dig into kind of the 4 pillars of creating the spaces around inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. And because most individuals have not worked in an environment or led in a way that encompasses all of that, it's a bit of it's a learning curve. And you really have to look at where is the organization currently in each of these pillars. what structure do they have in place? How big is that gap from where they are and where they need to get to? And what does it look like for them? And how is that going to feel? And that's where coaching can really come into play, where you can have those one-on-ones with an executive and really talk through kind of what are the behaviors they're presenting and how do they want to shift that? What do they want to lead in a way? And who are all the other individuals that could benefit from some of those one-on-one conversations to really understand? Doing cultural assessments. What does it feel like to work here? That's a way to kind of start seeing what those gaps are and really hearing from employees and building something custom based on where you are versus coming in with kind of a canned approach. Like that's just not going to meet each individual organization with where they need to go. Definitely following a framework, yet really leaning into, what are their goals and where are they at and where do they need to get to? And it's a shift. Like I'm just starting to experience it for the first time in my life, like being able to partner with you and other individuals that really understand this and have open, transparent conversations, have conflict, and know that it's all for progress. And there are certainly times where, as we're learning, we make mistakes, and then being able to own that and model that. Of like, that wasn't my, the impact you felt was not my intent. Let's have a conversation about that. I don't want to have you feeling, a certain way if that's how something impacted you. That wasn't the intent. So really digging in and being vulnerable. I mean, there's so much as leaders, depending on, kind of what that career path was, there may not have been ever exposure to being vulnerable as a leader and admitting that you're going to make mistakes. And that's a perfect way to model. We all make mistakes. We all have gaps in our knowledge. And why wouldn't you want to leverage the expertise you're paying out in salaries? Like leverage that and really kind of lean in. And what else would you like to add in that?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you spoke about this, vulnerability that's needed on behalf of the leaders. And because I always say, anytime I'm, coaching leaders and in my executive coaching part of my business, my consulting, is that you were placed in a leadership position, but that doesn't mean you were given the leadership tools and resources to effectively lead.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that is the case. People are put in leadership positions because they're experts in what they do, right? They have shown throughout the years that they are effective. They, the decisions that they've made in their role has, allowed the organization to grow and such. They're experts in their field. But they may not be experts in leadership, right? And oftentimes that's where the disconnect is, where you have great people who are doing great work, but are not great leaders. And in leadership, it's vast, like that servant leadership skill or philosophy that's needed. Many leaders don't have it, and if they want to have it, don't know where to find the resources and the skill set to be able to have that and give and have the opportunity to actually practice it. And so it takes humility to realize that I'm in a leadership position, but I'm not a great leader. Like it takes a lot for someone to be able to say that.
Yeah, and organizations that, promote from within, which is fantastic. You go from peer to now you're a manager, and then you're the executive, and you've had these relationships that were as a direct colleague. Now you're leading. I mean, that adds its own area of vulnerability and, needing to have transparency and owning mistakes and just creating a safe space.
Right. No, it's a challenge. To say it's a challenge for both sides of the coin. And since we've both been, employees as, and staff, as well as leaders, we see the challenges there. And that's why I think that together with diversity and inclusion strategists, we're DEI and psychological safety coaches and executive coaches, practitioners who've come together and work on certain projects together, right? Because of our diverse expertise. I'd love for you, to share how you and I, as well as some of our colleagues that are part of this consortium can help organizations out there create a psychologically safe environment.
Yeah. Yeah. What I love about our consortium coming together is it's really leaning into, first coming into an organization and understanding where they are.
Right.
Like, really getting that baseline of what does it look like to be an employee in your organization. So coming in and doing some discovery conversations, what are their goals? What's the impact if they do nothing? Like, do they even care? Like, fundamentally, if at the end of the day, it's checking a box, we're probably not your team. We really want to go into spaces where organizations care and want to make a difference for their employees. And, fundamentally, that's what we're leaning into. And then, based on kind of where they are, figuring out that roadmap for them. What does that look like? How do we embed this into the core of what you do so it's not a one-time initiative? This is really changing the way you operate and really building out that model. So yeah, definitely can vary based on where they are, what resources do they have internally, and then with our consortium, just kind of pulling in who's got expertise in this area, where's their balance, it's pulling that all together, doing assessments, and then coaching definitely has been a critical piece in helping drive that success as well.
Exactly. And I know as a CEO and founder of uBuntuSpeaks and, and the branch Ubuntu, the workforce development branch of it, and DEI, I love teaming up with other, specialists and experts in this conversation, because I strongly believe that organizations also need to hear a diverse thought, and strategies, like diverse strategies on how to meet their needs. And so that, they can really see that there's opportunities, right? And the opportunity, and it's not always fixed. And one thing I love about us, our consortium, is that we are diverse in so many ways, but also in the experiences that we have. Some of us, have had experience doing, like I said, government work, like in that government space, and others in corporations. Others have experience in higher learning, and so because we've had these other experiences outside of the business, the consulting businesses we each have now, we're able to bring that together and offer something to our clients that really, it gives them a buffet of possibilities, if that makes any sense, right? And to really guide them based on their needs. Whereas, there's some of us like you and I who, our bread and butter is talking to those leaders, right? Like getting them to sit down and be like, look, you want to keep your staff, right? Let's talk about, let's dig deep about how you're contributing. Whereas, part of it, we have others who are great at like the strategy piece of it, doing that strategic plan, and others who are like, okay, the assessments, let's, what are the policies of this organization and how these policies hindering the progress that can happen. So that's what I love about, as CEO of my own consulting firm, I realized that, especially during this time, that organizations are looking for like a buffet of strategies they can choose from. And so when we come together, we're like, hey, we're it, diversity and inclusion strategies, I think is a great consortium that allows for that. And then, and to be able to do, what we do best in our individual consulting firms also. So thank you so much, Deb. We're wrapping up this, this episode. And before I do that, I want to give you the opportunity for some final thoughts, as well as to share how people can reach out to you if they have any additional questions. And also, once again, tell a little bit more about the services that you provide and how you can help them in various different ways.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Hermens, for having me. To connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn.
So once this airs, people will have access to the links and everything.
Yeah, and I really focused, my company is Genuine Compass, really focused on positive intelligence, psychological safety, and then organizational culture facilitation. I generally partner with others for that work. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for those of you who know me or are new to Conversations Spoken in the Dark, I'm Hermens Mitsotsa. I'm your global health, cultural intelligence, cross-cultural communication, DEI, like just anything that has to do with connecting people. I'm that person. And so uBuntuSpeaks, known as Ubuntu, the name of my consulting firm is based on this philosophy of human interconnectedness. I am who I am because we all are, because I strongly believe, my team and I strongly believe that if you are able to create a psychologically safe, welcoming, and space of belonging for individuals, and you see them, you respect them, you give them that space to, contribute and show up the way that they authentically feel they need to show up, and then see them as a part of the solution, then you know what, together we can accomplish anything, and we can really tackle some of these tough problems that the world is dealing with right now, one team at a time. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining us at unsafe, Conversations Spoken in the Dark. And for all my insomniacs out there, 2022, please get some sleep. Please get some sleep. I strongly believe it's going to be a better year. Knock on wood. And I will also invite all of you to continue with our leadership and workforce development series, and join us and be on the lookout for our next podcast. Thank you and have a pleasant day, and take care wherever you are in the world. Good night, good morning, good afternoon. Just take care. I am who I am because we all are. Much love and blessings. Bye-bye.
Because we talked about psychological safety and the new working from home, we thought we'd share one of the outtakes that we experienced while recording this podcast.
And for the people that they serve.
Yeah. And can we pause a moment? I have a cat running that is hitting my door, and I'm worried it's going to